Welcome back to Intro to Philosophy 1010, and this video is for the first reading, the Katha Upanishad. So it's a 6-week class, very reading intensive. I know there's probably going to be an issue with people getting their textbooks this first week, so it's going to be especially important to listen to these videos while you're waiting for your textbook if you haven't gotten it already. You can listen and watch these videos. That'll give you all the main ideas you need. I'm going over all of the exam questions in the back. At the end of each chapter, there's discussion questions. Those will be your exam questions for your open book exam. So if you listen to these, by the time you get your book, everything should be okay. So the first reading, and as I explained in previous videos, the book is 4 fundamental questions. Here's my shabby, to be retired soon version of the book. An anthology of ancient philosophical writings up to the most recent, probably not 21st century, late 20th century, so covers a lot of time. The Katha Upanishads are probably about 500 to 600 BC, according to Richard Bilsker's introductory note. And so let me just start getting into the Katha Upanishad. It is a Hindu text. The next text we're going to read is a Buddhist text, and the Buddhists rejected Hinduism. Buddha was a Hindu. He rejected the fundamental belief in an individual soul, and including a personal God, who would be an individual supreme soul, as we will see in the Katha Upanishad. So the 4 fundamental questions. The first fundamental question, part 1, I'm take my page here. Who or what am I? A fundamental question I think everyone should ask themselves. What am I? Am I just this body, or is there some soul that lives when the body dies? The latter is the answer according to the Katha Upanishad. So here's the setting. It might have been difficult when you were reading it to understand what was going on. But there is a Brahmin boy, and he is watching his father do a fire sacrifice. And according to Hinduism, during the fire sacrifice, you're also supposed to give charity to the Brahmins. The Brahmins are the priestly caste. It's a caste system. The Brahmins are at the top. It's like a pyramid. The Brahmins are the educated elite, and they are supposed to control their sense desires. Their sex desire, their desire for food, their desire for intoxication. They're supposed to be strictly controlled. Then the next caste down is the Kshatriya caste, the warrior caste, the administrator political caste. Below them, the merchant class. Not only do they do business like a merchant in a shop, but they're the landed gentry, the agriculturalists. And then the bottom, 4th lowest base of the pyramid of the caste system is the Shudras, the laborer caste, and they help the other 3 castes. Below them, they call them the Chandalas, outcasts. So the 4 castes, all of which they're a member of the caste system by their belief in the Vedic system. The Vedas were the earliest known written philosophical texts, and the Vedic is the adjective that refers to anything based upon the authority of the Vedas. And the Vedas were supposedly the knowledge. Veda means knowledge. It's the knowledge of God. And so, let's just begin this text. So on page 3, chapter 1, verse 1, Vajasravasa, that's the father, desiring rewards, performed the Vishvajit sacrifice, in which he gave away all his property. He had a son named Nachiketa. Okay, so here's what bothered Nachiketa, the boy. He saw that his father was supposedly giving away all his property, but what he was really doing was giving away cows who could no longer drink, eat, give milk, or calve. So he was giving away his sick and dying cows. Cows were the foundation of the economic system, because the cows could eat the grass, could produce milk, and from milk they could produce so many different things, cheese and yogurt, and even oil for the lamps, the ghee, clarified butter. So he should have been giving his healthiest cows to the Brahmins, according to this system, but instead he was giving his sick and dying cows, trying to relieve himself of the burden for caring for them. So it was a double negative, and his son Nachiketa realized that if he allowed his father to do this, his father could go to hell. So he asked his father during this fire sacrifice, who will you give me to? He's thinking as a boy, well, maybe my father can compensate for his sin if he gives me, his son, away. That will, in addition to these sick and dying cows, you get my promising young boy, Nachiketa. So he kept pestering his father, to whom will you give me? To whom will you give me? And eventually, his father, like Homer Simpson in the show The Simpsons, he said, unto death I will give you. Like in The Simpsons when Homer shakes Bart Simpson's by the neck. In a fit of anger, his father said, I'll kill you if you keep pestering me. But if you say something during a fire sacrifice, it seems, you have to keep your word. And it was a mistake, but for whatever reason, the next thing we know, Nachiketa is down in the underworld, in the world of death, waiting for the arrival of the king of death, Yamaraj. Yama means death, Raja means king. But he's waiting there for 3 days and nights, and then someone tells Yamaraj, there's a Brahmin waiting for you, been 3 nights, you haven't offered him any water or anything. Oh, well, according to the Vedic system, if you don't offer a Brahmin at least some water to drink, some basic, necessities, then you incur sin, and that could cost you, for example, your kingship of the underworld. So the king of death was very worried, and he went to Nachiketa and he says, I'll give you 3 boons. You'll see on page 4, verse 9. So the first boon, or the first wish Nachiketa asked for, was that his father would no longer be angry at him when he returns to life. So he was really getting 2 for 1 there. He wanted to go back to his body as a living boy, and he wanted his father to be not angry with him anymore. So Yamaraj says, okay, he will not be angry. He'll be so happy that you're freed from the jaws of death. Everything's going to be fine. The next thing Nachiketa said was, I want to know about the fire sacrifice. And Yamaraj explained the fire sacrifice is a bridge to the other world. That gets into the complex cosmology, which isn't elaborated in this Katha Upanishad. It's referred to, and I will use this whiteboard to give you a little bit of an idea of what this cosmology is about in a second. But let's just move for now to the third boon. Nachiketa said on page 5, verse 20, Nachiketa said, there is this doubt about a man when he is dead. Some say that he exists, others that he does not. This I should like to know, taught by you. This is the third of my boons. So the first thing that strikes me with that third question, there's some doubt about what happens to a man when he's dead. Well, Nachiketa is in the underworld. He's talking to the king of death. So that's always confused me. It would seem Yamaraj should say, well, you're dead. I'm talking to you. This is what happens. But at any rate, that's not what he says. Instead, Yama said, on this subject, even the gods formerly had their doubts. It is not easy to understand. The nature of Atman is subtle. Choose another boon, O Nachiketa. Do not press me. Release me from that boon. So Nachiketa said, this is all I want to know. This is the ultimate question. I need to know the answer. I won't take anything else. So then Yamaraj tempted him. You can be the king of the earth. You can have 1,000 grandsons who will live to be 100 years. I think that, that's page 6 is where he gets into the details. I will give you these celestial women with these magical chariots, all these heavenly treasures. Nachiketa says, I don't want any of that. Anyway, I've seen you. You're the king of death. So I'm already going to live to be, very old, and I will not release you from this boon. Tell me what happens to a person after death, which is related to our first fundamental question, who or what am I? Am I the body, so when I die, that's it? Or is there a soul, and I exist after death? So Yamaraj said that he was, first of all, happy with Nachiketa for not falling for the temptations. He was not dissuaded by the temptations of pleasure and power and wealth. away from the fundamental question about what happens after death. And then he began to explain. Yama said, the good, this is on page 6, near the bottom, chapter 2, verse 1, it's on page 6. Yama said, the good is one thing, the pleasant another. Both of these, serving different needs, bind a man. It goes well with him who of the two takes the good, but he who chooses the pleasant misses the end. Okay, so there's two paths, the good and the pleasant. And you'll see on page 7, the good is associated with knowledge and controlling your sense desires, whereas the pleasant is associated with ignorance of the self and becoming a slave to your bodily desires. On page 7, verse 5, Yamaraj says, fools dwelling in darkness, but thinking themselves wise and erudite, go round and round by various tortuous paths like the blind led by the blind. The hereafter never reveals itself to a person devoid of discrimination, heedless and perplexed by the delusion of wealth. This world alone exists, he thinks, and there is no other. Again and again he comes under my sway. So, Yamaraj is explaining to Nachiketa that the person who takes the path of pleasure has to suffer the cycle of reincarnation. So he's saying the soul will be born again and again if you persist in identifying yourself with the body and seeing your main goal of life is to fulfill its desires. So continuing here on page 7, verse 7, many there are who do not even hear of Atman. So Atman means soul or self. There's another side of the self called Brahman, and we'll get into that. So many there are who do not hear of Atman, though hearing of him many do not comprehend. Wonderful is the expounder, and rare the hearer. Rare indeed is the experiencer of Atman, taught by an able preceptor. Atman, when taught by an inferior person, is not easily comprehended because it is diversely regarded by disputants, but when it is taught by him who has become one with Atman, there can remain no more doubt about it. Atman is subtler than the subtlest and not to be known through argument. This knowledge cannot be attained by reasoning. Atman becomes easy of comprehension, O dearest, when taught by another. You have attained this knowledge now. You are indeed a man of true resolve. May we always have an inquirer like you. So there you have some important points that are going to come up in these discussion questions. This knowledge of the self, or Atman, cannot be attained by reasoning. There are other philosophers who say it can be, but Yamaraj says it cannot be. And it must be taught by someone who's already become one with Atman, or realized that we are all always one with Atman. And that way you can escape the cycle of reincarnation. So then Yamaraj explains at the bottom of page 7 that he is only relatively eternal. He's a demigod. He's not the supreme god. Even his body will die, although it'll be after an enormous amount of time. So compared to a human life, the demigods are eternal, but compared to the eternal soul itself, they're just as temporary as a fruit fly's life. So then, on the top of page 8, the fulfillment of desires, the foundation of the universe, the rewards of sacrifices, the shore where there is no fear, that which adorable and great, the wide abode and the goal, all this you have seen, and being wise, you have with firm resolve discarded everything. So the foundation of the universe, the shore where there is no fear. In a previous video, when I was discussing 20th century physics, the evolution of physics from Isaac Newton's theory of gravity through special relativity, general relativity, quantum mechanics, to string theory, which unites general relativity, which is Einstein's theory of gravity, with theory of the very big, and quantum mechanics, the theory of the very small. As I said in that previous video, those two physics can't be used in each other's domains. String theory tries to unite the two, and what's the ultimate conclusion that has been drawn so far from string theory is that all of the information describing the past, present, and future of every event in three-dimensional space, every object, every event that unfolds historically or will unfold in the future, all of that information is interwoven at each point of the encompassing sphere of the universe. the cosmic horizon, where space-time appears to be expanding away from our perspective on Earth at the speed of light. It's all interwoven there at each point like a holographic film, and then it radiates back in to create the holographic illusion or movie, cinematic hologram of our three-dimensional world. That's what string theory says, and that is very similar to what the Vedic cosmology says. It's also very similar to what Plato says in his dialogues. That information radiates in on these fundamental threads, which creates this three-dimensional world that we live in. So the foundation of the universe that Yamaraj talks about, the shore where there is no fear. Another thing I should point out here is this is a near-death experience of the boy Nachiketa. He's talking to death. Other near-death experiences are also very similar to this. People feel themselves rising out of their body, looking down at their body, then they see themselves looking down at the planet Earth. They feel themselves hurtling through space faster and faster until they appear to be traveling down a dark tunnel toward an infinitely loving and brilliant point of light in which their whole life flashes before their eyes. They can have intimations of the future. They feel like they become one with the cosmos. Plato refers to a very similar near-death experience in the end of the Republic. We will be reading a little bit from the Republic, not that near-death experience called the myth of Ur. But the psychologist Carl Jung, he described a near-death experience like that. More recently, the neurosurgeon Eben Alexander, he wrote a book about his experience of the cosmic horizon. He said he heard the sound Om there. So I think it helps to have that image in mind when reading the Katha Upanishad. Because the self, according to Yamaraj, it's the source of all space and time. It contains all space and time. It is the self. And each individual soul that reincarnates through material bodies, we're all part and parcel of this ultimate Atman. The little Atmans are part of the great Atman. And Atman is also one with Brahman. So, let's continue here. Continuing on page 8, the second verse down from the top, the wise man who by means of concentration on the self realizes that ancient effulgent one, who is hard to be seen, unmanifest, hidden, and who dwells in the buddhi, that means intelligence, and rests in the body, he indeed leaves joy and sorrow far behind. So someone who realizes this great ancient effulgent one leaves the duality of the material world behind, joy and sorrow. The reason we feel joy sometimes and sorrow other times is because of the succession of time itself. But if you experience all points of time simultaneously, then you leave joy and sorrow behind because you experience joy and sorrow simultaneously. You experience every experience simultaneously, and that's this kind of consciousness that you have if you become one with Atman, according to the Katha Upanishad here. So this next verse, verse 13, on page 8, we're introduced to the concept of Brahman. The mortal who has heard this and comprehended it well, who has separated that Atman, the very soul of Dharma, from all physical objects, and has realized the subtle essence, rejoices because he has obtained that which is the cause of rejoicing. The abode of Brahman, I believe, is open for Nachiketa. So we had the Atman, now he describes the afterworld for the soul as Brahman. That's the verse where these two are used interchangeably, Atman and Brahman. In that video about physics that I posted before this one, I described the two-slit experiment that describes the particle-wave paradox of quantum mechanics. I also have a video about that, a little cartoon, Dr. Quantum. It's a helpful educational video. I think it's about 5 minutes, maybe a little longer. But it's worth watching because some of the physicists who helped develop that whole theory pointed out the parallels between the particle and the wave nature of the quantum world that was discovered in 1927 and the Atman-Brahman paradox of Hinduism. Atman would be comparable to the individual particle. When you shoot these electrons or photons or any particles through the two slits, and then behind the two slits you have a detector screen. They're always detected as particles, but where will that little individual particle appear on that detector screen? If you're not observing which slit they go through, One might be over to the right, one might be over to the left. And after a while, all those little particles create the pattern as if a wave had gone through both slits at once, radiated as two individual waves, and then created a rippling pattern, an interference pattern, they call it. If you observe which slit the electrons go through, then they align directly behind the two slits, just like little bullets would have done. They maintain their particle nature the whole way through if you observe them. They're particles when you observe them. They're waves of probability when you don't directly observe them. And a wave of probability was a new idea that completely baffled physicists when that term was discovered. How can probabilities travel like a physical objects? What is a wave of probability? And so to help them explain it, some physicists pointed out these parallels with Hinduism. Erwin Schrödinger, for example, David Bohm, famous American physicist, protege of Einstein's. And that's just a couple. This was Heisenberg, also knew about these kinds of parallels, but he was, I think, more interested in Plato and seeing parallels with Plato's philosophy and quantum mechanics. So if you consider the self to be Atman and Brahman, and if you see parallels between Atman and the particle nature, as described by quantum mechanics, and Brahman is the wave nature, when the Brahman aspect of the self is merged impersonally with all the universe, how can you separate one wave from another in the ocean? But as soon as you observe that wave, it transforms into an individual particle. It's similar to the way, if you think of yourself, you become an individual ego. But if you're not thinking, then your mind gets carried away on fantasies and instinctual patterns of thought. For example, if you're dreaming or if you get intoxicated, the more you get intoxicated, I think the more like a wave of instinctual probabilities you start acting like that. The more you are concentrating on who you are, then the more you can control yourself as an individual particle. All right, so continuing on page 8, and then we're going to be skipping around. Nachiketa said, that which you see as other than righteousness and unrighteousness, other than all this cause and effect, other than what has been and what is to be, tell me that. So he's asking Yamaraj, tell me what's different than cause and effect, the past and the future. What is different and transcends all these pairs of opposites? Again, it's Atman and Brahman, and here Yamaraj continues to say, Yama said, the goal which all the Vedas declare, which all austerities aim at, and which men desire when they lead the life of continence, I will tell you briefly. It is Om. So the syllable Om in the Hindu philosophy contains everything. It's the sound manifestation of God, or Vishnu, as we'll come to see. And as I pointed out, Ibn Alexander, this Harvard-educated, or is he just a Harvard professor? At any rate, he is a renowned brain surgeon. He had this near-death experience. He went out to the cosmic horizon, the foundation of the universe, and he said he experienced God as Om. Even though he's a Christian, he experienced his Christian interpretation of God as Om. So Yamaraj continues, the syllable Om is indeed Brahman. The syllable is the highest. Whosoever knows this syllable obtains all that he desires. Continuing to the bottom of this page here, he explains that the soul's never born and never dies. If you think you killed somebody, you really didn't. You killed their body, but not their soul. Up at the top of page 9, Atman, smaller than the small, greater than the great, is hidden in the hearts of all living creatures. A man who is free from desires beholds the majesty of the self through tranquility of the senses and the mind, and becomes free from grief. Though sitting still, it travels far. Though lying down, it goes everywhere. Who but myself can know that luminous Atman, who rejoices and who rejoices not? The wise man, having realized Atman as dwelling within the impermanent bodies, but itself bodiless, vast, and all-pervading, does not grieve. All right, so another point that I made in that video about physics was the similarities between a concept like Atman Brahman and the concept that was originally derived from general relativity of a gravitational singularity, which you would find in the center of a black hole or in the center of an inside-out black hole known as the universe, which is expanding from a singularity instead of contracting into one. if you compare the way physicists describe the gravitational singularity to the way the Katha Upanishad describes the Atman, which is one with Brahman, they're very, very similar. The singularity contains the past, the present, and the future. All of the universe was contained in the original singularity according to the Big Bang Theory. Similarly, Atman also contains all the past, present, and future of all of space. It's smaller than the small, greater than the great. The singularity is a point of infinite density, zero volume. You cannot get smaller, and yet it manifests itself everywhere and is contained at each point of the encompassing sphere called the cosmic horizon. According to quantum mechanics, it's also located at every point of three-dimensional space in the underlying quantum vacuum. So I'll leave it at that. There are many parallels between the gravitational singularity as described by general relativity, quantum mechanics, and string theory, and the Hindu concept of Atman. There are also many similarities between the singularity and Plato's concept of the idea of the good, which we'll see later in the book. Okay, continuing here on page 9, verse 23. This Atman cannot be attained by the study of the Vedas, or by intelligence, or by much hearing of sacred books. It is attained by him alone whom it chooses. To such a one, Atman reveals its own form. He who is not first turned away from wickedness, who is not tranquil and subdued, and whose mind is not at peace, cannot attain Atman. It is realized only through the knowledge of reality. Who, then, knows where he is? He to whom Brahmins and Kshatriyas are mere food, and death itself a condiment. So you saw that, at least in this translation, Yamaraj went from calling Atman it is attained by him alone whom it chooses, to calling it he, who then knows where he is. A personal pronoun like he seems more appropriate when referring to Atman. If it can choose to whom it wants to reveal itself, then it is a person with the sense of free will and an ability to choose. So it's a personal God. It's an idea of a personal, all-pervading God, all-knowing, all-pervading, and furthermore has the ability to choose whether or not to reveal itself or himself. And him will be more appropriate when we get further in this text to the idea of Vishnu. But I do want to keep this rolling because we've already done 26 minutes, and I don't want to bore people into the underworld, and you can ask Yamaraj yourself, so I won't do that. You can just listen to this video. So, continuing on page 9, let's go to this chariot metaphor at the bottom. Know the Atman to be the master of the chariot, the body, chariot, the intellect, the charioteer, and the mind, the reins. The senses, they say, are the horses, the objects, the roads. The wise call the Atman, united with the body, the senses, and the mind, the enjoyer. So, you have this image of the soul as a passenger on a chariot, and the intellect, the intelligence is the charioteer. The intellect carries the reins, which is your mind. They differentiate between a mind and the intelligence and the body. The senses are the horses. Your sense of smell, your sense of taste, your sense of touch, your sense of hearing. Your five senses are like horses pulling your body, which is the chariot. And your intelligence is supposed to be guiding these senses. Go there, don't go over here. But if the charioteer, your intelligence, can't control the horses, the senses, then they're going to go all over the place. This one wants to go get that object of sense desire. That one will go get that one. Oh, an attractive potential mate. Delicious food. Intoxication. And if that's the way it is and your charioteer cannot control the horses, then you're going to wreck your chariot and you'll have to suffer the cycle of reincarnation. You'll be born again and again. However, continuing on page 10, verse 9, a man who has discrimination for his charioteer and holds the reins of the mind firmly reaches the end of the road, and that is the supreme position of Vishnu. Beyond the senses are the objects, beyond the objects is the mind, beyond the mind, the intellect, beyond the intellect, the great Atman, beyond the great Atman, the unmanifest, beyond the unmanifest, the Purusha, beyond the Purusha, there is nothing. This is the end, the supreme goal. So, this is where special effects, my high-tech special effects come into play. Okay, I'm looking here at this how much you can see. So here's just a basic cosmology. According to the Hindus, Vishnu has many forms. One of Vishnu's forms, now Vishnu has 4 arms, so there you go. Goes to sleep. Vishnu descends from a spiritual world into this cosmic ocean of potential being. It's referred to as the causal ocean. It's the cause of the material world. Sleeps on this ocean and starts to dream. And as he dreams, bubbles, which are universes, exhale from his body. And each universe, so here's this each universe, imagine these are 3-dimensional spheres with concentric spheres. And each concentric sphere is a particular element. And so this is how it goes. And in the center of each of these universes is another Vishnu form. So let me do one here, a little Vishnu form. And then there's all these concentric spheres. And the elements that they refer to these spheres as is earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego in some texts, or in this text it's simplified, it's just called the cosmic mind. So let's just say this is the cosmic mind. Cosmic mind. I know you can't read that, that's too small. So the outer sphere of each bubble universe is the cosmic mind. And then, going back to my book, so here is the road to Vishnu. So, beyond the senses are the objects. Beyond the objects is the mind. Beyond the mind, the intellect. Beyond the intellect, the great Atman. Beyond the great Atman, the unmanifest. Beyond the unmanifest, the Purusha. Beyond the Purusha, there is nothing. That is the end, the supreme goal. The self, that self, hidden in all beings, does not shine forth, but it is seen by subtle seers through their one-pointed and subtle intellects. The wise man should merge his speech in his mind in his intellect. He should merge his intellect in the cosmic mind, and the cosmic mind in the tranquil self. Okay, so some of these words are getting mixed up, but if you look beyond the objects of the senses, which are made of earth, water, fire, and ether, then he says, beyond the intellect, which is the same as this cosmic mind, this outer sphere of the universe, is the unmanifest. The unmanifest is Brahman, the waves of probability. It doesn't manifest as anything until you observe it directly. And then it says in this verse 10 through 11, beyond the unmanifest, the Purusha. Purusha means controller. It refers to Vishnu. Beyond the Purusha, there's nothing. This is the end, the supreme goal. Purusha, the source of all the universes in the megaverse, and he's located in the center of each of these universes, and furthermore located in the center of every soul. Very similar to the idea of a gravitational singularity. All right, continuing on page 11, chapter 2, part 2, chapter 1, verse 1. This is page 11. Yama said, the self-existent supreme Lord inflicted an injury upon the sense organs in creating them with outgoing tendencies. Therefore, a man perceives only outer objects with them and not the inner self. But a calm person, wishing for immortality, beholds the inner self with his eyes closed. And in the next few verses, he'll repeat that idea of the calm-minded person can perceive the supreme Atman. Up at the top of page 12, he who knows the individual soul, the experiencer of the fruits of action, is Atman, always near, and the Lord of the past and the future will not conceal himself from others. This verily is that. Continuing down on page 12, verse 11, he says, by the mind alone is Brahman to be realized. Then one does not see in it any multiplicity whatsoever. He goes from death to death who sees multiplicity in it. This verily is that. So, the unity of all being is being expressed there. If you can see underneath the individual temporary material forms an underlying source in which we are all one, which he's calling in this verse Brahman, then you can escape the cycle of reincarnation. If you look a little bit up on that page 12, verse 9, whence the sun rises and whither it goes to set, that's the horizon, in whom all the devas are contained, devas means the demigods and goddesses, and whom none can ever pass beyond, this verily is that. That's just to reinforce what I've been saying about this cosmic horizon. Brahman and Atman are located where the sun goes to rise and set. That is the horizon. And it's also associated in the universe with the cosmic mind of the universe, at each point of which the past, the present, and the future are interwoven according to near-death experience accounts, such as the one found in the Katha Upanishad. Very well might be the oldest written record of a near-death experience. All right, so if you look at the bottom of page 13, verse 11, this, the firm control of the senses, is what is called yoga. One must then be vigilant, for yoga can be both beneficial and injurious. Atman cannot be attained by speech, by the mind, or by the eye. How can it be realized in any other way than by the affirmation of him who says, he is? Okay, the last page of this text, page 14, verse 16, I think this is just interesting. There are 101 arteries of the heart, one of which pierces the crown of the head. Going upward by it, a man at death attains immortality, but when his prana passes out by other arteries going in different directions, then he is reborn in the world. The arteries of the heart, according to the Hindu philosophy, there's a gross material body, and then there's a subtle material body made of those outer elements in the universal sphere: mind, intelligence, and false ego. Just like your gross physical body made of earth, water, fire, and air have arteries and a circulatory system, so does the subtle body. And the circulatory system of the subtle body is known as the chakra system, the kundalini. You might have heard about it with the third eye here. And one of the chakras is at the crown of the head, and if you can raise your soul up through that subtle material body, like blood goes through the arteries, prana, this subtle air, carries the soul out of the top of the crown chakra, and then you can escape the cycle of reincarnation that way. The next verse, verse 17 on page 14, the Purusha, not larger than a thumb, the inner self, always dwells in the hearts of men. Let a man separate him from his body with steadiness as one separates the tender stalk from a blade of grass. Let him know that self as the bright, as the immortal, yea, as the bright as the immortal. Then the final verse, having received this wisdom taught by the king of death and the entire process of yoga, Nachiketa became free from impurities and death and attained Brahman. Thus it will be also with any other who knows in this manner the inmost self. So now the discussion questions. Page 15. Discussion question 1. Now these will be the exam questions. I'll give you a choice of part A will be 250-word essay questions, and part B, you'll choose 2 of those, will be 100-word essay questions. So the more complex questions are more likely to be the 250-word essay questions. And the exams are in the modules, the learning modules at the end of each one. There's 4 modules for each part of the book, for each fundamental question. So all of the exam questions you have right in this book. Discussion question 1, page 15. Explain the difference between the 2 paths Yama discusses with Nachiketa. So the 2 paths were the good and the pleasant, way back in the beginning on page 6 of the book. Down near the bottom, chapter 2, verse 1. Yama said, the good is one thing, the pleasant another. So then the next few verses over on to page 7, he associates the path of the good with knowledge and sense control, and he associates the path of the pleasant with bodily pleasures and ignorance of the soul, and therefore going round and round through the cycle of reincarnation. The path of the good is knowledge of the soul, renouncing bodily desires, and being free from the cycle of reincarnation. Okay, so discussion question 2. One of the suggestions Yama makes is the practice of yoga. What is the role of yoga here? He didn't mention yoga until the very end of nearly the end of this reading. On page 13, near the bottom, verse 11, the firm control of the senses is what is called yoga. One must then be vigilant, for yoga can be both beneficial and injurious. All right. So controlling the bodily sense desires is yoga. There's a lot of different types of yoga. Most people are familiar with hatha yoga, where you do things like the downward dog or the, all the different yoga positions that there are. But that's just one type of yoga. Another type of yoga is known as jnana yoga. That's what we're doing here. This is philosophy, kind of working out your mental, your subtle body. There's also bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotional service in an attitude of love for God. So Christianity emphasizes loving God, would be considered, according to the Hindu perspective, bhakti yoga. So whatever type of yoga you choose to practice, the goal, according to the Katha Upanishad, is to control your bodily sense desires. If you can't do that, you won't have a calm mind. If you don't have a calm mind, you can't focus on Atman and Brahman, which are united in Vishnu. And if you can't do that, then you're bound to be reincarnated again and again, and that's considered to be a miserable prison sentence. So, at the very end also, the last verse is another reference to yoga. Having received this wisdom taught by the king of death and the entire process of yoga, Nachiketa became free from impurities and death and attained Brahman. So that's the purpose of yoga. When you're writing your exam essays, it helps to cite the page and the verse, a short, pertinent quote, so that I know you read the book. That's all I'm grading you on the book. Whatever perspective I have, which will become more or less obvious as I teach the class, is irrelevant to how I grade your paper, your essays, your discussions, your exams. Knowledge of the book, that's all I want. I encourage you to express whatever belief you have, and don't feel shy about it. Be polite. Don't try to trash somebody else's worldview, but you can defend your own worldview as vigorously as you desire, so long as I know you read the text and you know what you're talking about. Then you will get an A in the class. Okay, so the final discussion question is a strange one, and I hope I changed it on the exam. I'm going to check it tomorrow. It's not a strange question, but it can be interpreted another way. Question number 3 on page 15. The Atman is described in a very different manner than the Judeo-Christian conception of a soul. What are some of the main differences? Explain. Well, when I read it, I see a lot of similarities also. I mean, they both believe in a personal God who can choose to reveal himself to you or not to. You have to receive this information about the supreme soul from somebody else who already has experienced oneness with God. For in Christianity, it's Jesus Christ. You have to accept it, this knowledge from Jesus. There's no other way. For the Hindus, there's not just one self-realized soul. There's others, but nevertheless, you have to find someone who's already become one with God in order to gain that knowledge. And they advise you to renounce bodily pleasures as much as possible, to sort of die to this world so you can live in the eternal life. There's a lot of similarities. There's some differences also. Reincarnation is not explicitly taught in the Bible, although some people say there are references to it, such as when Jesus said to his apostles, "Who do you say I am?" And then some people said, well, I've heard some people say you're John the Baptist. Some people say you're Isaiah, if I recall correctly. And then I believe Jesus said, no, John the Baptist was Isaiah. And then someone finally said, you are the Christ, you're the Messiah. And he said, but don't tell anybody. So at any rate, if you start talking about, oh, you're another person who lived in the past, that seems to be a reference to reincarnation, which was certainly well known in Rome during the time of Jesus Christ. All right, so what I'm going to do on that question is say that you can explain what are some of the main differences or what are some of the main similarities. It just depends on what your interpretation of Christianity is. But I think it's a good question because it helps you compare and contrast two different worldviews. Okay, so that's 42 minutes and 42 seconds right now. And that is all she wrote for the Katha Upanishad, although we will be returning to this text in subsequent texts because the discussion questions ask us to compare those readings back to that earlier Katha Upanishad. The next video I will make is for the next reading in our book, The Non-Existence of Individuality. It's a Buddhist text, and the philosophy is summarized in Anatman, no Atman. There is no individual eternal self. That is Buddhism, and that's coming up next. And thank you for watching, and we will be back in a little while with Buddhism.